every golden emperor in RZRR history.
Blood and gold, for that is where all power stems from.
Emperor Xian Xin, the ambitious tiger. The long lineage of the golden emperors goes back 500 years and has stayed remarkably intact through wars, revolutions and petty scheming, in contrast to their close neighbour, the Crimson Throne in the west of the dual empire, which has gone through many iterations, often because of external manipulations. Today, however, we focus on China. Ren Cunxin, the father. The story of the Rens began as a rogue meteor named Halogi crashed into Central Africa, wiping out the Congo and ushering in an age of emergency. The event not only decimated the Earth's climate, leading to mass starvation and civil unrest, but it also sent a destructive electrical magnetic pulse and blanketed the sky in dust, which plunged much of the world into darkness. Chinese general Ren Cunxin and his family were caught in the chaos. As nights dragged into weeks, his son, already fragile, suffered a mental collapse. The general, now forced to confront not just the global devastation, but also his own family's future, had to move swiftly. The ruling government of China had invoked the Yong Act, a draconian measure to quell unrest. It had backfired horrendously, leading to food shortages and nationwide riots. General Cunxin, with his reputation as a logistical genius, was able to consolidate power, outmaneuvering his political rivals, and orchestrate a quiet coup in the halls of government. Now in charge, Cunxin wasted no time. By 2069, his Ren Act restructured China's resource distribution, restoring order and, crucially, the public's faith in the government. He also began shaping his grandson, Ren Di, for leadership. With the world still in chaos, Cunxin reached out to Russia in 2070 to secure a trade agreement, a move that not only strengthened China's stability, but also cemented its hold over Eurasia. Cunxin launched the invasion of Taiwan later that year, at a moment where none of the Western powers were fit to defend it. It was clear that China had entered a new era of expansionism. As Cunxin aged, his growing influence over the newly established Russian Empire culminated in the Pan-Sino-Russo alliance in 2083, with Russia effectively becoming a client state under the administration of Alexei Martynov, a puppet ruler installed by China. The creation of the RZRR was a testament to Cunxin's ability to manipulate geopolitical events to his advantage. By 2084, it had expanded into Ukraine and Belarus, solidifying its control over Eastern Europe. By the time Cunxin died in 2093, at the age of 81, he had not only secured China's survival, but also positioned it as the premier global superpower. His death came with the confidence that the future was in capable hands, as he named his grandson, Ren Di, as his successor, setting a dangerous precedence of blood right. Ren Di, the Great Dragon. Upon Cunxin's death, Emperor Ren Di and Russian Emperor Alexei Martynov declared the formation of the dual empire of China and Russia as two equal emperors, merging the nations into one unified power that stretched from the Pacific to the Atlantic. By 2109, the RZRR launched the world's first skyhook, a slingshot station that could ferry spacecrafts into orbit for a fraction of the cost. This gave the nation a monopoly on space exploration, while much of the world was still reeling from the Halogi impact. Ren Di's reign, which would last for 50 years, was marked by rapid expanse and technological advancements. Colonies were established on Luna, Mars and Venus, putting taikonauts on a long list of moons and planets, as far out as Saturn. The Great Dragon sought to leave a dynasty not just as rulers of China, but as emperors of space. Despite his towering accomplishments, Ren Di's legacy was troubled with internal strife. His eldest son, Chunyan, later known as the Lost Tiger, was beloved by his father, but lacked the political acumen of his younger brother, Suji, later known as the Ambitious Tiger. As Ren Di aged, tensions between his sons grew, with the Lost Tiger poised to take the throne, but the Ambitious Tiger vying for power behind the scenes. Ren Chunyan, Emperor Han of Ren, the Lost Tiger. Born in 2084, Chunyan was the first child of Ren Di. His early years were spent in the Forbidden City, away from the brutality of the world, marked by a naive kindness that would eventually become his downfall. As a child, he idolized his father and adored his younger brother. Yet where Chunyan saw love, Suji, the Ambitious Tiger, saw competition. In 2143, the nation mourned as their beloved emperor, Ren Di, died of old age and left his eldest son to inherit a fractured throne. Despite his father's affection, Chunyan's ascension was received by the cold indifference of the oligarchy and the simmering resentment of his younger brother. Innocent and idealistic, The lost tiger believed in unity and peace, but the wheels of power spun too quickly for him. In the dark corridors of the imperial palace, his political inexperience proved to be a fatal flaw. The Russian emperor had barely crowned him when whispers of abdications began to stir. Suji, cunning and ruthless, orchestrated a quiet yet lethal coup. He schemed, blackmailed, and manipulated key officials, sowing seeds of doubt about his brother's capabilities. For a year, Chunyan fought to maintain control, not realizing the noose tightening around his reign. By 2144, worn down by the relentless pressure, the lost tiger was forced to abdicate. The younger brother he once loved became his successor, Emperor Xianxin, the ambitious tiger. Chunyan hoped to retreat to a quieter life with his family, but fate would not grant him peace. In 2146, tragedy struck when he and his son perished in a mysterious spacecraft explosion while en route to visit Luna. To this day, many historians believe that the ambitious tiger was behind this accident. Ren Suji, Emperor Xianxin, the ambitious tiger. Suji was the man who carved out his destiny with a will of iron. Unlike his older brother, he had the support of the upper echelons of power and knew exactly how to exploit their desire for a strong leader. Ironically, however, Suji's reign was rather short and eventless. His greatest contribution was coasting on the momentum of his previous successors. RZRR continued moving personnel to the neighbouring planets, further expanding space operations, and the dynasty at home seemed set in stone. In 2156, at the Imperial Flower Garden, Ren Suji collapsed, succumbing to a heart attack. His legacy was one of ruthless greed, forever tied to his brother's demise. Ren Xian, Emperor Xing the Elder. The death of the ambitious tiger brought forth a new ruler, one who had lived in silence, in the shadows of his father's indifference. Xian was Suji's son, but their relationship was one of neglect. He had watched his father's rise to power with disinterest, more excited in the stars than the petty scheming of the imperial palace. When he became emperor, Xian's reign was already on borrowed time. It was only luck that kept his throne safe. In 2165, RZRR and LIFA laboratories discover the Holland quintessum graviton element, and with it a path to artificial gravity. The path to the solar system lay now wide open. Lanes to Venus and Mars carried countless to the colonies. The RZRR empire reached new heights, but not without tragedy. Back home, the Isabella Deluge, a worldwide catastrophic series of tsunamis and floods, destroyed much of the empire's coastal cities. Hong Kong lost to the sea, Shanghai barely survived. By 2190, the polar caps were officially gone. Water levels stabilised, and the temperature stopped rising. Millions lay dead in the wake. New York, Tokyo, Abu Dhabi, Jakarta, and countless other cities gone forever. Xian faced these years with determination and helped bridge differences between agencies on how to best work together, earning him the respect of his people. Perhaps in response to his father's neglect, Ren Xian was deeply devoted to his own family, particularly his grandsons Shenpeng and Their births brought him great joy, and he worked hard to ensure their preparations for the future. Unlike previous generations, Ren Xian was adamant to prevent familial strife from dominating his reign. In 2222, at the impressive age of 104, Ren Xian, Emperor Xing the Elder, passed away, leaving behind a legacy of discovery and change. His son, Ren Suji II, ascended to the throne. Ren Suji II, Emperor Xing the Younger. Not much can be said about Suji II. His reign lasted only 7 years, as he did not ascend the throne until old age, with his regime already secured with his children tutored by his grandfather. Suji II's leadership was a stabilising interim force, but his death in 2229 would spark the very conflict he and his father had spent their lives working to prevent. Ren Shenpeng, Emperor Shen, the Humble. In the 23rd century, the Ren dynasty ruled over a sprawling empire from Mercury to Saturn, yet often shaken by the forces of nature and political intrigue at home. At the helm now was Emperor Shen, born Shenpeng. His life and reign of 11 years was marked by humility and a strange hunting accident. Whilst hunting deer in the royal park of Milu Yuan in southern Beijing, Shenpeng was shot and killed by a high-caliber rifle. He died instantly. The other guests of the hunting party claimed innocence, and the investigators could never match the bullet. The perpetrator was never caught, and the truth was buried with the emperor, leaving the dynasty to his son Chun. Ren Chun, Emperor Gong the Unfortunate. Ren Chun, emperor at 30, carried the burden of his father's unexpected death. Naive and unprepared for the Golden Throne, his reign lasted only a year before he also succumbed to an unexpected death. An assassination attempt during a rally which left him mortally wounded, the perpetrator committing suicide in the midst of the angry crowd. At the hospital, Chun abdicated, with no heir to carry on his legacy. Ren-er, Emperor Su-young the Vengeful. Into the vacuum of power stepped Uncle Ren-er, finally able to seize what had eluded him for decades. With 2 emperors dead by the gun, rumours would always follow him. Ruled the imperial palace with an iron fist, but his reign was neither long nor particularly eventful. He died of a heart attack at 72. Ren-chu, Emperor Ren-chao the Just. And so the Golden Throne passed to his son Ren-chu. At 44, he had spent his life in training for the political stage, treating his responsibilities with the utmost respect. His reign lasted almost 30 years, which saw great leaps in space technology and his empire. In 2267, with the ITU invention of the triple C-45 atmospheric conversion system and the Nigerian climate stabilization sequencer, capable of mending Earth's fragile climate, but also a potential for terraforming other planetoids. RZRR were quick to develop plans for terraforming the Moon, but a coalition of Earth factions created a treaty against it, forcing the RZRR to back down and sign the Lunar Pledge, that no atmospheric alterations would be permitted. This was only a small setback for the RZRR, however, as in 2270, propulsion breakthroughs in Bolivia and Chile allowed for better and faster ships. In the years after, RZRR landed a taikonaut on both Titania by Uranus and Triton by Neptune, all culminating in their first quintessum reactor and atmosphere conversion facility on Mars. In other words, the red planet was going green. Ren-chu would never see this 100-year process, as only a decade later, at the age of 73, he fell down the stairs of the imperial palace and fractured his skull, ending his life and the reign of the just. Ren-sa-ofa, Emperor Shou the Miserable. In the twilight of the RZR's golden age, Emperor Shou of Ren, known to history as the Miserable, ascended to the throne at the age of 34, inheriting a vast empire both glorious and troubled. The world, or rather the worlds he ruled over, had reached its peak under his father, the Just. However, Emperor Shou's reign would be marred by the slow, inexorable decline of this once great nation and the suffocating weight of catastrophes. Sa-ofa ascended the throne in 2282, crowned during the dazzling appearance of Halley's Comet as it streaked across the skies of Terra. 1 year later, the Empire's space monopoly was shattered when LIFA, the Federated States of the Americas, completed its own orbital skyhook, breaking the RZRR's hold over interplanetary transport. Other empires were now rising, hungry for the power and wealth Sa-ofa's ancestors had enjoyed for so long. The colonization efforts that had once brought the RZR to new worlds, like Mars and Venus, were now matched and exceeded by others. The restored League had begun its own terraforming projects on distant moons like Titan, and LIFA was making its presence felt on Titania and Triton. The year 2309, it began with a pulse. In the deep chambers of the Xin Shanghai Observatory, scientists stared in disbelief at the data pouring in from their monitors. The sun was erupting in a solar flare of unprecedented magnitude. The warning systems, usually reliable, struggled to process the sheer scale of the event. The Emperor's advisors gathered in the Crimson Palace of Vladivostok, grim-faced, debating their options, but in truth there were none. They could not stop what was coming. On Mercury, RZRR workers were toiling the iron mines, protected by cutting-edge technology designed to withstand the harshness of magma, but as the solar flare reached its peak, it became clear that nothing could withstand it. Communications from Mercury faltered. Then, silence. Sa-ofa was in his private chambers when he received the news. 50,000 lives, Your Majesty, whispered by his chief advisor. As the minutes passed, more reports came flooding in. The planet Venus was next. The RZRR had long held it as a symbol of imperial ambition, its floating cities a testament to mankind's tenacity. But when the flare struck, the platforms, those engineering marvels, began to fail. A catastrophic malfunction sent one of the largest disk city, Arbon, spiralling down into Venus's unforgiving atmosphere. Hundreds of thousands were aboard when it collapsed, crushed by the planet's hellish pressure. It wasn't just Venus and Mercury that suffered, Terra went through it too. The International Space Station and the RZRR Imperial Grand Fleet were hit hard. Battle cruisers SYD Volga and Svalbard were lost to the solar damage. The radiation disrupted vital systems, deorbiting the station and ships until they were beyond saving. A few thousand souls died in space that day. not to mention the long-term effects on Terra for the next decades as cancer diagnoses spiked dramatically. The empire grieved. In the streets of Vladivostok and Beijing, people gathered in silent vigils, praying for their loved ones, cursing the government for their weak responses. Rebuilding was slow, and to pay for it, Saofa and the Imperial National Assembly had to sell away some highly priced territories. In 2313, the Jovian moon of Io was sold to Lifa, including the mining facility Moscow and its colonial town. Saofa, the Miserable, died of old age in 2342, after a life of trials, declines and disasters. He was succeeded by his son, a man who would be known as the Merciless, and for good reasons. Ren Daidai, Emperor Xinjian the Merciless. When Xinjian ascended the throne as emperor, he inherited a fracturing empire, but where his father had brooded in quiet misery, his son would seize power with ruthless efficiency. Xinjian grew up in a time when the RZRR's hold on its colonies was weakening, and rebellious factions, Chinese republicans, Russian separatists, Venusian independence groups, were whispering of change in the streets of Terra and beyond. To add to his suspicions, the Imperial National Assembly had grown increasingly bold during his father's reign, challenging the authority of the throne at every turn. 2 years into his reign, in 2344, Xinjian unleashed his political purge. It began quietly, with a few arrests here and there, aimed at those openly suspected of treason, but soon enough, it spiraled out of control. Thousands of politicians, intellectuals and military officials were rounded up on accusations of everything from terrorism to socialist leanings. The assembly halls, once filled with debate, were now haunted by silence, their most vocal members either executed or imprisoned. Behind closed doors, Xinjian himself sat in darkened chambers with his advisors, poring over intelligence reports and dossiers of suspected dissidents. Every political faction became a potential enemy. Even the worker unions, who had demanded better living conditions on the industrial platforms of Venus and Mercury, were targeted as enemies of the state. What began as a campaign to secure his throne had turned into a reign of terror that enveloped the entire empire. Over the course of 2 brutal years, approximately 200,000 citizens were executed across the solar system. The bodies of the Martian independents were buried in the red sands of their planet. The pro-Venusian rebels were flung from the floating platforms they had once hoped to govern. The rest, some 500,000 souls, were exiled to the far corners of the solar system, imprisoned on nameless asteroids that served as brutal labour camps. Few would ever return. In the aftermath, Emperor Xinjian's control over the Imperial National Assembly was complete, the once powerful institution now a shadow of its former self. When he died in 2370, his legacy was one of fear, bloodshed and paranoia. The empire he left behind was now only 2 decades away from breaking. The scars of the Xinjian purge would never heal, and Seoul would forever be haunted by the memory of the merciless. Ren Huaqi, Emperor Shunao the Blind. The purge may have secured his father's rule, but it did little to maintain his own family. His eldest son, Huaqi, was born in 2331, a moment that should have marked the continuation of the imperial glory, but Huaqi was born blind. To Xinjian, this was a grave disappointment, a weakness that he could neither understand nor accept. Despite his father's derision, Huaqi grew up under the heavy burden of imperial expectation. He was trained rigorously in statecraft, military tactics and philosophy, his blindness never an excuse for failure. But the emotional scars ran deep. Huaqi's relationship with his father was strained at best, and yet Huaqi would eventually ascend the throne. His reign was one of quiet strength. He forged alliances through diplomacy rather than terror, believing that in a stretched frontier where the vacuum of space itself easily destroyed life, fear was not in itself an efficient tool. His rule, though short, includes the birth of his only son, Ren Yuen, and his marriage to the fierce and ambitious Qin Mei, a woman who would later etch her name in history. Huaqi's true legacy lay in Mars. For decades, the terraforming of Mars had been a symbol of the RZRR's technological might, yet its completion had been fraught with setbacks. When Huaqi ascended the throne, he poured resources into ensuring the project would meet its deadline. Under his guidance, and with the tireless efforts of scientists and engineers, the planet was successfully transformed. Its skies blue, and its red deserts gave way to vast, habitable regions of hills and rivers. The dream of a second Terra was realised, and the glory of the old RZRRs shone bright. In 2383, Huaqi's reign came to an end as a brain tumour took its toll. What followed would be 60 years of unrest. Ren Yuen, Emperor Jin, the Young Dragon. The ascension of Ren Yuan was expected to be a new chapter for the dynasty, a chance to get things back on track. Young, capable, and with his wife Qin Mei expecting, hope was high in the Imperial National Assembly, as well as amongst the people. But fate had other plans. Diagnosed with stomach cancer shortly after being crowned, Yuan's reign was cut tragically short under 2 years. With their only child, Ren Xin, more commonly known as Shutan, born severely disabled. Qin Mei, Grand Empress Shui the mother. In the annals of the RZRR, few figures cast as long a shadow as Grand Empress Shui. Born in 2358, she rose from obscurity to become one of the most polarizing and powerful women in history. Her reign, which spanned 55 years, saw immense upheavals, wars, pandemics and revolutions. Yet, it was her personal struggles and ruthless Machiavellian politics that defined her legacy. Qin Mei had no royal blood. Instead, her marriage to Yuan was meant to solidify the position of her father, the CEO of RZNC Inter, the premier nuclear energy company. After the death of the emperor, the Imperial National Assembly, filled with whispers of discontent, doubted the survival of the dynasty, but in an unprecedented move, Qin Mei was crowned interim empress. She was to be steward of China, as her infant son was unable to rule, but with the lineage still intact, could provide a future heir. Her ascension was met with immediate resistance. Nobles who saw her as a usurper, enemies who loathed the monarchical system, and even allies who questioned her capabilities all sought to discredit her. Only 1 year into her rule, the rebellion of the 12 shipyards erupted. Driven by poor working conditions on Venus and high taxes imposed by the RZRR on Terra, workers took to the streets. The shipyards enacted a blockade against the RZRR. With new advanced battleships, the RZRR was no match and backed down. A few weeks later, Venus declared independence, leading to the birth of the Venite Republic. If this wasn't enough, the year after saw the first confirmed cases of the Monk bat virus, a highly infectious and deadly virus. Starting on the eponymous platform on Venus, it spread quickly. In 3 years, it would kill 33 million people and reach every planet in the system, from Mercury to Nuevo Triton. Venus claimed it was a biological weapon used by the RZRR, an allegation that gained some traction with their enemies. But the fact is, few nations suffered as badly as the dual empire. When Indonesia discovered a cure for the virus, the RZRR was hanging on by a thread. In 2396, the Venite Republic saw this as a chance to invade Mercury, of which they had claimed for years, under the justification that most of its inhabitants were Venusian by birth. Again, Terra and the RZRR stood by, as state-of-the-art ships secured control of the inner system. These events hardened Qin Mei's resolve to maintain control, pushing to arrange a marriage of her young, disabled son Shutan, who now wore an enigmatic gold mask to hide his deformities, to the Baroness of Guangzhou, to secure an heir to the dynasty. Internally, the rumours of revolution were growing. Socialism had found fertile ground in the colonies, first on Venus and now on Mars. These planets had long felt exploited by the mother world, and with the Great Economic Depression hitting during the Big Dip of 2435, it became clear that Qin Mei's grip would not hold. The workers' uprisings grew in number, threatening to tear away more territories. After ruling for 55 tumultuous years, Qin Mei's reign came to a bitter end in 2440. Her twilight rule spent in an intense power struggle with her now aging son Shutan, who had come into his own as a political force. He had slowly earned the loyalty of key military figures, and their alliance threatened Qin Mei's control. The quiet battle between mother and son culminated in her forced abdication. She died many years later of old age. In the end, Qin Mei, Grand Empress Shui, was remembered not for her victories, but for her indomitable will. She was the mother, not just to her family, but to an empire that never revered her, but feared her wrath. Ren Xin, Emperor Shutan, the Masked. The blind and deaf Shutan grew up under the crushing weight of his mother's ambitions. She married him off at the age of 13 in a cold, calculated political move. A year later, he became a father, but the child died hours later, adding another layer of sorrow to his already tragic life. The courtiers whispered behind his back, calling him feeble. His golden mask, hiding the scars of his birth, became a symbol of his mother's control. The birth of his second son, Ren Shouchen, was a monumental joy for him, and a political victory for Qin Mei, and with his third child, Ren Suinin, it was clear that the bloodline was secure. Shutan's ascension was not a moment of triumph, but a bitter transfer of authority from a dominating mother. The empire, now celebrating its 350th anniversary, welcomed his ascension, But Shutan ruled only for 4 years. During that time, he watched the nation's continued decay as economic depression deepened and separatist movements rose. His eldest son and heir, Shushen, died unexpectedly of a heart attack at the age of 36, leaving behind a daughter, Xuanlu. The loss of another son broke Shutan's spirit. In 2444, a stroke fell the emperor. The demise of Shutan the Masked was not the end of succession concerns, but the beginning of new unrest. The RZRR now stood on the brink of civil war, as political revolutions threatened the throne. Ren Suinin, Emperor Shun the Generous. Shun was never meant to wear the crown, but when Shutan fell ill, he saw an opportunity to maneuver himself into power, ousting his 8-year-old niece, Xuanlu, the empire she once believed to be hers, stolen by her uncle. But Shun would learn the price of getting what you want when only 3 years later, another workers' rebellion rose. This time on Mars, led by the charismatic General Maximovich Dinamov. The socialists went to war against the royalist forces, triggering one of the bloodiest periods in Martian history. The war dragged on, and though the royalists initially had the upper hand, they were ultimately forced to retreat by Dinamov's navy of mutineers. The creation of the Confederation under the general's leadership was a painful loss for Shun. Mars, once the jewel of the RZRR, was no longer his, a defeat that would forever tarnish his legacy, earning him the moniker the Generous. Shun announced the end of the Martian Civil War and established puppet states of Helia and Elysium to cling to what remained of his influence on the planet, the old empire now gone. Shun's death came in 2468 at the age of 56. Official records proclaimed it was of a lack of exercise and poor diet, but whispers spread in the grand halls of the Forbidden City. Had Shun's years of failed wars, internal strife and personal guilt finally caught up with him? Despite his many military failures, Shun was a skilled politician and a popular figure. He was considered a very likeable man and often the talk of any social gatherings he attended. Gen Genshu, Emperor Jitso-gen, more commonly known as Emperor Rai-Sogun in the English-speaking world. As his father had done before, Rai-Sogun used his ruthless political wit to continue the delegitimization of Xuanlu, daughter of the former heir apparent Shushen. The dukes, barons and the Imperial National Assembly were all too happy to keep the old train on track. To most of them, Xuanlu was just a name, an uncertainty, and so they crowned Rai-Sogun, whom they had developed a relationship to. She would hate him and his father till her dying day. Her son, Ren Shusong, the Duke of Shanghai, would continue that legacy, raised on the belief that he is the rightful heir to the throne, his 2 sons, also thorns in the emperor's side. Rai-Sogun has 2 children with his wife, Empress Consort Joy, whom he loved dearly, before her death to cancer in 2499, something which has made him quite cold and callous in his ambitious resolute. He is often disappointed with his children, Crown Prince Ren Shuitan, whom he pressures to live up to the empire's towering expectations, and Ren Shiwen, who would later become Queen Raina on Mars, resentful of being sent away to marry King Sun II of Helia. These strained relationships cast doubts over the dynasty's future. Rai-Sogun's reign has so far seen sweeping economic reforms and political renewal, including the contentious decision to begin terraforming Luna against global protests. His pragmatism has led him to broker secret deals, which seem lucrative for the empire so far. His manipulation of court politics is unmatched, yet while his title is secure, the winds of war is building. Seoul teeters on the edge of another conflict. With old wounds on Mars and Venus threatening to erupt into new struggles, scores will have to be settled. Rai-Sogun's reign stretches on into its 45th year, and the question to ask is, what will tomorrow bring the RZRR? A new golden dawn or a blood-red sunset?